So I have a great regard for your institution and for all the great endeavors that you are aspiring to pursue. So this is a tremendous pleasure for me to address you. Let's now compress the 4.1 or 4.2 billion year history of life on Earth to 100 years. And this is from a cave painting in France dating back to 15,000 BC. So they saw life written into the stars with Louis Pasteur, who made a groundbreaking discovery in 1865, decisively disproving spontaneous generation. And the probability is 1 in 10 to the 1,000, and which is around something like equivalent of 500 people throwing a double six with two unbiased, unloaded die. It is fair to say that life anywhere must now mean life is present everywhere. This neo-Darwinian theory is wrong. The neo-Darwinian theory as an explanation for the origin of life is certainly inadequate, it's almost certainly wrong. Finally, I want to address this question. And again, it's a question that has been asked through ancient times, through Vedic times, through Hindu mythology, Indian mythology. Everywhere, ancient ideas have converged on this question: how did life begin in the universe? Not how did life start on the earth, but how did life begin in the universe? So I have a great regard for your institution and for all the great endeavors that you are aspiring to pursue. So this is a tremendous pleasure for me to address you. My title is, as you heard, Inalienable Links with the Cosmos and Ancient Indian Knowledge, particularly knowledge from the Vedas. Okay, this is a Milky Way, which we all see on a dark, cloudless night. It stretches from horizon to horizon, and I can see some palm trees there. So it's obviously some part of India or a tropical island in which this picture is taken. So the Milky Way is a stunning sight and would have greeted our ancestors night after night, prompting the question, how do we, on a tiny planet, fit into this grand scheme of things? Stone Age man depicted this connection in art, as in, for instance, in this cave painting, which shows Orion's belt, constellations of Pleiades, and the Taurus constellation, the constellation of the Bull, and they saw life written in the stars. And this is from a cave painting at 15,000 BC, which shows a bull, which represents the constellation of Taurus and the various stars in the sky. Pleiades is shown there, Taurus, and it's from a cave painting in France dating back to 15,000 BC. So they saw life written into the stars. Our knowledge about life on Earth and in the wider cosmos has, of course, grown exponentially from Stone Age times to modern times and eventually to the space age. So we see here, we see the Stone Age caveman and the Stone Age man and so on. And this is a modern human being with a computer, like I have a computer in front of me now, and humans going out into space, and maybe eventually the dominance of AI. Who knows? So this is the trend that's happening on the Earth. The science of geology provided strong evidence against the Darwinian paradigm, which states that life was generated spontaneously on our planet. Very recently, about less than 10 years ago, it's been found that the very first evidence of microbial life on Earth is to be found inside crystals of zirconium that formed some 4.2 billion years ago. And these rocks and these crystals are now exposed in an outcrop of rocks that rock formation in Western Australia. And this is a picture of the Jack Hill's region in Western Australia. These are the structures, little carbon globules within crystals of zirconium, which formed and condensed 4.2 billion years ago. And we know that these are residues of life because they have certain carbon isotope ratios that signify that they come from living, maybe probably from living bacteria. So that's 4.2 billion years ago. So this was the beginning of life on the Earth, to a time when the Earth itself was in the middle of very, very violent and fierce impacts from comets. And this data and this new discovery strongly supports the thesis that comets actually delivered life to the Earth some 4.2 billion years ago. So with these impacting objects, with impacting comets, with impacting asteroids, the first life was introduced to the Earth. This was discovered in the form, as I said, of carbon blobs within these zircon crystals, show clearly that they were derived from bacteria, the first bacteria to arrive and to take root on our planet. The progression of life from these first simple microorganisms to humans is also recorded in the geological system, in the rocks. The deeper we dig into the rocks, further back we see into time. And so here you have right through the sequence of tertiary, Cretaceous, and so on, Cambrian, all the way to modern times, and they are obtained. And this sequence of fossils are discovered by digging deeper and deeper into the ancient rocks. Let's now compress the 4.1 or 4.2 billion year history of life on Earth to 100 years. 4.2 billion years is a very long time. We can't easily sort of comprehend it in terms of our experience. So let's squash it to 4.1 billion years, right? So 4.1 billion years compressed to 100 billion years, 100 years, a century. So a single cell bacteria, and they came with these rocks that I told you 4.2 billion years ago, they would dominate the Earth for the first 75 years of our compressed century of terrestrial life. Flowering plants, and along with the flowering plants, winged insects that to pollinate them arrived 3 years ago. The dinosaurs arrive on the Earth 6 years ago in this compressed century of life. And a comet strikes the Earth, of course, and there are mass extinctions that follow. And this is followed by a huge surge of small mammals. So all that happened 6 years ago in the compressed history of life. Our direct ancestor, called Homo erectus, human-like creature walking upright on 2 legs, arrived 2 weeks ago in this compressed century of life. Homo sapiens, hunter, food gatherer, and with a brain equipped to unlock the secrets of the universe, arrived just 18 hours ago. 18 hours ago in this compressed century span of life on our planet. So that's the sum total of our proprietary claim to our planet, no more, no less. But how many other habitable planets are there in the cosmos? That's what I want to talk about now. Ideas about life in the cosmos have had a long history, of course, stretching back over thousands of years, and with a distinct cultural divide between East and West. The fundamental choice, as we shall see, lies between spontaneous generation of life, let's say life starting spontaneously from non-life on the Earth, and the theory of panspermia, or the idea of panspermia, which says that life is a cosmic phenomenon, eternally present in the cosmos, taking root whenever and wherever conditions became suitable. seeds of life are distributed right through the cosmos. The basic concept of panspermia, which is now gaining ground, as I shall try to show you, has a long pre-Western history. In Western traditions, it's fairly recent, as I shall point out, but in ancient Indian and Vedic traditions, it goes back to further back than 2,000 years before the Common Era. In the Western tradition, it starts with the philosopher called Anaxagoras, a Greek philosopher, pre-Socratic philosopher, and it continues from there to the present time. The distinctly Western concept of spontaneous generation came much later, 150 years after Anaxagoras, and it was due to the great philosopher called Aristotle, great Western philosopher, Aristotle. Aristotle was a pupil of Plato and a teacher of Alexander the Great, and it was, of course, a towering influence on Western philosophy. It was Aristotle who introduced Earth-centered cosmology, plus Earth-centered biology. That is to say, life emerging from non-life, whenever the conditions became correct on the Earth. So that was Aristotle's position. And these ideas came to dominate Western thinking for many hundreds of years. With the rise of Christianity in the West, theological and institutional support for Aristotelian philosophy followed from the time of St. Thomas of Aquinas, which is 1200 odd BC, of the Common Era. And thereafter, it was the Pope who decided, the Roman Catholic Pope, head of the Roman Catholic Church, who decided what was correct and what was not correct. And the most important questions of our existence then became locked into theology. Hard evidence in support of panspermia, of course, came with much, much later, with Louis Pasteur, who made a groundbreaking discovery in 1865, decisively disproving spontaneous generation. So Pasteur had these experiments in which he had broth in which microbes can replicate, and he had a flask that he heated and with a curved neck, so anything that falls cannot fall into from the air, fall easily into this. And when he boiled the broth remained free of microorganisms. And when he broke open the top and allowed the liquid, the nutrient, to be exposed to the air, then he found microorganisms. So from this very simple experiment, he concluded that life is only derived from pre-existing life. Despite Pasteur's discovery, Aristotle's spontaneous generation really was the dominant philosophy that survived, and it took the form of the so-called primordial soup, and persisted well into the 20th century, well, almost to modern times. So life emerging from a mixture of organic chemicals, undergoing a set of chemical reactions, and ending up with a living system. That was the thesis that dominated Western philosophy. And the only evidence offered in defense of this theory has not really progressed very far beyond experiments that were carried out in 1951 by two people, Urey and Miller, who showed that amino acids and other organic molecules that are needed for life may in fact be produced in the laboratory quite easily. He had a mixture of inorganic gases in this flask, and by sparking it with electricity and so on, he found that organic molecules could be formed. For the simplest bacterium that you can find on the Earth, a bacterium called Mycoplasma genitalium, the probability of its crucial enzymes, that is the the proteins that are the working horse of biology, the probability of these crucial enzymes being assembled from random processes can be estimated quite easily by simple statistical arguments. And the probability is 1 in 10 to the 1,000, and which is around something like equivalent of 500 people throwing a double six with two unbiased, unloaded die, like these things here. So the total number of atoms in the entire universe is only 10 to the 80, and the probability of this microorganism, the crucial enzymes of the simple bacterium being assembled from just shaking the amino acids together is less than 1 in 10 to the 1,000. So that's the kind of improbability that is being faced here. So it's not surprising that 7 decades of very high-tech laboratory work devoted to proving the thesis of spontaneous generation has proved to be a dismal failure. No success has been achieved right through to the present day. The 20th century revival of panspermia, which I said originally is an Indian idea, goes back to Vedic times, began with my work in 1961 with the late Fred Hoyle. And we were, I think, without being overly modest, I can make the statement that we were the originators of the modern version of panspermia, cometary panspermia, we called it, involving a synthesis of well-established geology, astronomy, and biology. So combine geology, knowledge from geology, astronomy, and biology, you get the modern version of panspermia, which is the theory that I was involved in from 1961 onwards. Our studies are well documented as was mentioned already in the introduction, by very many peer-reviewed papers and over some 40 relevant books and monographs and many papers in Nature. From the turn of the millennium, supportive evidence for panspermia has grown exponentially. One relevant question that had to be answered was possible to answer only after, sorry, what's happening here? After the year 2000. And this question was how many Earth-like planets exist outside our planet, our own planet, outside our own solar system, planets that can support and harbor life. Now, there's been a satellite, a Kepler space telescope, operating on a satellite from the year 2009, attempting to answer this question, how many Earth-like planets are there outside of our solar system? And these are some of the depictions of some of the planets that have been discovered, they call Kepler 62, 62 ABC, and so on. The NASA's Kepler telescope has now discovered many thousands of planets, and with a grand total of an estimated 140 billion in our galaxy alone. So there are hundreds of billions of similar galaxies in the universe, and there must be a huge number of planets, and many of which, a large fraction of which, would be Earth-like. And this picture shows how the planets are discovered by the Kepler satellite. You can't really see the planet with the telescope, but you can look at the star that is here, and examine the star over a length of time. And if a planet is orbiting the star, then there's a slight dip in the intensity of the light that comes from the star. So that's how the exoplanets, as they're called, have been discovered. In 2017, this is one of the planets that has been discovered. It's a very cool star, cool red star, located at 39 light years away. So light takes 39 years to reach this star, and there are seven, they reckon there are seven habitable planets, planets that could have atmospheres and oceans that are orbiting this star. But I think one of the most interesting recent developments is that this James Webb Telescope was deployed to make a very, very startling discovery that has sort of made headlines from April of this year, April 2025. And what they did was to look at a star, and the star was called K2186, which is at a distance of 120 light years away. And they found that there was a chemical called dimethyl sulfide that is only known to be created, or known to be formed by living systems, and in particular by phytoplankton on the Earth. So if this signal for this molecule is there on an exoplanet, then one can be fairly confident that there must be life, microbial life, on that exoplanet. So it's a watery planet that is orbiting, going around this star that is at 120 light years away. And April this year, there was a startling report and a discovery, breaking news, that there was a biomolecule that was discovered in this very faraway planet. So 2025 in the present year, let me summarize what the Kepler telescope tells you. Kepler studies leads to an estimate of 140 billion habitable exoplanets, that is, exoplanets where life can persist in our Milky Way system alone, implying that the average separation between stars that have such planets is only 4 or 5 light years. So that's a very close distance. And across such close distances, just 4 light years, the exchange between materials, dust, bacteria, viruses, and genes, and so on, must be considered to be very easy, even inevitable, and across these very short interplanet distances. So what it shows that if there's life on one planet, that we know there's life on the Earth, then that life will very easily be transferred to other planets that are in the vicinity of the solar system. So what is happening now in terms of gene transfer of DNA, transfer of genetic material, is that this well-attested process called horizontal gene transfer that is known to happen across species on the Earth must be happening on a cosmic scale, certainly on a galactic scale. And that would lead, I think, if genes are being exchanged, genes mean sort of strips of DNA that define our identities of the animals and plants. If these genes are being exchanged readily between habitable planets, then this would lead to a genetic similarity of all life in the galaxy. So life on Earth would not be that different from life elsewhere. So even if we do not know at the present time how, when, and where the first life started, it is fair to say that life anywhere must now mean life is present everywhere. And I've told you already that life is definitely discovered. I think even the hardest skeptics now would find it difficult to deny that life has been discovered on that one exoplanet with the discovery of dimethyl sulfide. So that must merely mean that life must be everywhere in the galaxy and by extension everywhere in the universe. So the theory of panspermia, and in particular, I call it cometary panspermia because we have argued that comets are the main carriers of bacteria and living particles across certainly across our solar system and across the galaxy. So this cometary panspermia theory makes a definite prediction. And one of these predictions is that dust from comets and interstellar medium, or the dust that is present in between the stars, must show signs of biology, spectroscopic signs of biology. So you have a first set of microbes arriving in a galaxy, say, the stars and planets forming that galaxy, and the microorganisms are multiplied, amplified, and thrown back into interstellar space. And this cycle must continue with a positive feedback. So cosmic dust contains bacteria and viruses in various states, is the conclusion. Even if we do not know how, when, and where life started, life anywhere, as I said, must mean life everywhere. Comet impacts not only brought the first life to Earth, but also delivered the new genes that gave rise to the whole process of evolution that I indicated in one of my earlier slides. It, for example, gave rise to the Cambrian explosion of life, from which all higher life forms were derived. Neo-Darwinian evolution then takes place. It's a very minor process. So Darwin has been demoted to being a very minor player in this story. But it happens, and it's only relegated to a fine-tuning process. Recent discoveries within microbiology point to the origin of microbes in space still further, and this further evidence comes from microbiology. Microbes are, in our view, the aliens in our space age. They are the true aliens. They move from place to place, from one location in the galaxy to another, and they're extremely hardy, they're incredibly space hardy. So they have a travel across with high rates of survival. A powerful case can be made from astronomy, therefore, to say that cosmic dust, the dust that is present in all these dark clouds that you see in the Milky Way, that this cosmic dust has a large component of bacteria. And so we made that prediction in 1981. It's a long time ago. And observations of astronomical source at the center of our galaxy showed that the predicted behavior of the bacterial spectrum in the infrared matches the astronomical data so precisely that we concluded that this really must mean that a large fraction of the dust that is present in space must have a biological bacterial origin. So in our theory, cosmic life, comets are the reservoirs, the incubators, and distributors of that life in the cosmos. The first evidence for organic molecules that may be relevant to life first emerged after the last perihelion passage of Comet Halley in 1986. Until 1986, astronomers argued fervently and vigorously that comets are just lifeless lumps, large lumps of ice, water ice mainly. And what happened in 86, was that Halley's comet came around in the space age and provided new evidence that proved beyond a doubt that bacterial dust was present in the flow out of Comet Halley. This is Comet Halley, this dark blob here is an image of Comet Halley taken in 1986 from a spacecraft. And the spectrum of the Comet Halley dust are the points with the error bars, and the curve is a prediction of bacteria. So bacteria desiccated, dried out bacteria in the comet has been essentially verified by this graph that I show you there. Then there were further missions to comets, further exploration of comets, and they all showed the same, essentially said the same story. Comets are full of living material, but cultural constraints then prevented even the inclusion of a simple life detection experiment on the mission that was conducted by the European Space Agency called the Rosetta mission, and I was part of one of the team members of this, and my colleagues and I proposed that there should be a life detection experiment sent on the lander. So there was a lander on this comet. The comet actually had this landing on its surface, and a very simple life detection experiment would have proved beyond doubt that the comet is full of bacteria, full of life. But that experiment did not take place because peer review deemed it unnecessary or not very relevant. So what happened subsequently was that the comet did not have a direct life detection experiment in the Rosetta mission, but the stuff that was spewing out from the comet had a spectral shape that matched the spectrum of bacteria, just like in the Halley's Comet case, and just like in the interstellar dust case, the similarity of this dip here to the comet's behavior is really uncannily similar, and indicates that it is life is definitely present in that comet. So in 2025, we have a further development of this same comet. This is the comet called 67P that was examined by the Rosetta mission. And they have reported the presence of dimethyl sulfide. And if you remember, I said dimethyl sulfide was a molecule that was detected on an exoplanet and thought to be an indicator of biology on that exoplanet. Now they found it on this comet that was examined in 2015 in the Rosetta mission. And because the astronomers had deemed, because the astronomers had deemed that comet to be a dead comet, they now have made the dreadful claim that no life is possible on a dead comet. What a travesty of science, I call it. Comets, sticking with comets, and there's at the present time there's a huge fuss, a huge hype about a comet called 3I Atlas that is coming not from our solar system, but coming to pass in the vicinity of the Earth and rounded by the sun, coming from a very distant planetary system. So this is a blob of material, I think, carrying bacteria and living particles that are coming from a very far away living system. It is just one example, I think, of the connection that I pointed out between planetary systems. They exchange material, they exchange genes, they exchange bacteria, and they exchange comets. So that's what's happening now, and the motion of the Earth around the sun is shown here. This is the sun, the Earth is moving around there, and this is a comet that is the Atlas 3I, coming from a distant planetary system, not from most of the comets that we observed, all of the comets, in fact, that we have observed over the last 100, 200 years, come from within our solar system. This is coming from outside of our solar system. So that's the reason for people are getting so excited about that. And we don't know what it would bring to the Earth, I think, or bring to the solar system. I think inevitably it will bring microorganisms. So whilst microbes from comets are the main contributors to panspermia, I think one has to admit that products of local evolution on a planet could also be transferred across galactic distances. Right? We could throw out from the Earth bits of evolved material, bits of debris, dust, and so on. So the products of our local evolution could then be thrown out into interstellar space, and it could be taken up by alien or exoplanetary systems. The sun's revolution around the center of the galaxy is well documented. We know that the sun and the solar system is not a static entity. It moves around the Milky Way, the center of our solar system, the center of our galaxy is there. So it moves around there once every 240 million years. And it, from time to time, it intercepts stellar systems rich in stars and comets and so on. And this is constantly happening. So material that could carry genetic information from different systems would all become mixed. So what I call lateral gene transfers would take place and connect every life-bearing habitat in our galaxy with every other life-bearing habitat. And so this ensures that Darwinian style evolution operates on a huge galactic scale. It's not the Darwin situation is regarded as being entirely local, but genes from our planet would reach other planets with life in at different stages of evolution. So the whole system, whole galactic system of life, would be genetically mixed. Evidence from biology has also been coming in very fast and furiously over the last 2 or 3 decades, during which I've been working on these matters. And the question whether comets are bringing new genes is a question that can be answered decisively. All the culture and our sort of cultural conditioning seems to prohibit such questions even being asked, let alone being answered. So comets brought the first life onto the Earth, brought the components that subsequently resulted in the evolution of life, elaboration of life, from simple microbes to plants and animals and finally to humans. And this is a process that continues. And so this is what I want to summarize now. First appearance of life, 4.2 billion years ago. And these are, for a full 2 billion years, we have only one single cell life, unicellular life. And then there's a huge explosion of life that takes place at this point, called the metazone explosion. Obviously, the solar system has been hit by a whole cloud of life-bearing comets at this time. And then we have the transition to multicellular life, and eventually to humans and mammals and so on. So this is the question that we now need to ask. So mutations, I mean, one of the titles that were offered to me is neo-Darwinian theory is wrong. I think neo-Darwinian theory as an explanation for the origin of life is certainly inadequate, is almost certainly wrong. But Darwinism acts only in a very limited sense to allow mutations to be followed by the selection of what's best fitted to the environment. So the mutations followed by natural selection are a very, very small process, but it assists in forming the so-called tree of life. To make the transition from one species to a radically different species, we need new genes, and those new genes, of course, come from the cosmos, from new comets arriving in the solar system, arriving at the Earth, and just like in a computer program, to change from one type of program to another, you need new computer codes, and that's what's happening in biology as well. Very similar process. So we require viruses to play a role in that, and bacteria to play a role in that, require genes from comets, either in the form of viruses or bacteria, to be inserted at every point where there's a dramatic change in our biological system. So this is what happens. There's original species on the Earth, which was simple bacteria. Then you have these yellow lines connecting involves addition of cosmic genes, viruses, or bacteria causing new species, proliferation of new species, and so on. So this is a network that is sort of continuous, and Darwinian natural selection acts only in the form of fine-tuning. The human genome has been found to contain over 5% of sequences that are derived from viruses. We don't often remember that, but if you look at the DNA sequencing that was done on the human genome in the year 2000, huge new discoveries followed from that. And one of the discoveries that followed from the unraveling of the human genome was that over 5% of sequences are derived from viruses, and they are essentially doing nothing. They are they probably are the storehouse of information for further evolution. So our DNA carries a history of also past pandemics. The pandemics of viral diseases could lead to the insertion of viral DNA into our genetic heritage. So this is the sequence evolution of hominids over 1 million years was marked by insertion of new genes from space. And this evolutionary tree, therefore, also is one where at every branching point, there are new viruses that have come from outside and producing the sort of changes that you see in living systems. Now, the next question I want to address in this talk is, if comets brought the first life to Earth 4.2 billion years ago, as I said, is there evidence that this process is taking place here and now? And we would require that that same process must continue, because it cannot, the Earth has been there, the universe is around, galaxies around, has been around, and so it must continue. And if you look at the Earth's orbit, the sun is at the center here, the red circle is the Earth's orbit. The Earth's orbit is enmeshed in a huge, almost a jungle of cometary orbits. The comets, each of these white ellipses is a cometary orbit. Most of the comets have come from within our solar system, from the outer reaches of our solar system, but a fraction has come, like Comet 3I Atlas, from very distant parts of the galaxy. So our planet has been essentially mopping up the debris of comets over a long period of time. Now, to prove that cometary dust enters the Earth and has a biological component was a project that we thought, that Fred Hoyle and I thought, was a really important project in the late 20th century. Towards the end of the 1990s, we were wondering who would put up balloons or spacecraft into the stratosphere, continually monitor the stratosphere of our planet for incoming bacteria and viruses. We consulted all the space agencies in Europe and in Japan and the United States, and they refused to waste their time and energy to look for this silly project that we had to look at the stratosphere and see whether there is biology being introduced from comets. What, however, happened and was very, very connected, strongly connected with India was that I had my colleague, Professor Jayant Nalika, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago. He and I and Fred Hoyle, we proposed this experiment to the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and ISRO said, okay, we'll do this experiment. And in 2001, on 20th of January 2001, the Indian Space Research Organization launched this experiment in a balloon to the stratosphere. And these are empty, evacuated sort of tubes that would have their valves open when they reach the 50-kilometer height. So everything that was in the stratosphere would rush in and be trapped in this and brought down. And what we found was that there was huge numbers of, this is what happened, right? So when the valve is open in the stratosphere, when this reaches the stratosphere, the air is sucked in, and if there are any aerosols or particles or bacteria, viruses, they all get in here. And so the cylinder and the contents are then parachuted to ground and examined in the laboratory, which was done both in laboratories in India and in America and the UK. And the results were absolutely staggering. We found that the air from 41 kilometers reveals unequivocal signs of microbial life. We found viable bacteria, but not culturable. We couldn't culture them. And they were proved to be microorganisms by use of various biological techniques, use of fluorescent dyes. So we found all this stuff there, nanobacteria and cocci, spherical bacteria, rod-shaped bacteria. And the height of 41 kilometers was, of course, too high for lifting microbes from the Earth. So on the basis of our statistics, we concluded that the daily input of microorganisms over the whole Earth, right, averaging over the whole Earth, was zero point 0.3 to 3 tons of bacteria entering the Earth every single day. And these are from outside. They're not bacteria that are taken up from the surface and brought back. They're alien bacteria coming in at this huge rate. So it's almost impossible to contemplate a system in which evolution has not taken account of this huge new or continuing input of new genetic material derived from microbes that have come from all corners of the galaxy, not from just our solar system alone, but from very distant places. So even more evidence has been obtained since the year 2000. The outside of the International Space Station was swabbed between 2010 and 2016, and the discovery of microorganisms was confirmed not once, but 6 times. And of course, the Indian experiment was done at 40 kilometers above the Earth. Now the space station is at 400 kilometers. And that's, of course, far, far too high for microbes to be lifted from the ground. So there is no doubt whatsoever that microbes from space are this very moment falling into the Earth, falling onto the Earth. Ignoring this vital fact, I think, the vital fact that stuff is falling, new genes are falling, and some of it can be pathogenic, some of it can cause disease, ignoring that vital fact would be to the detriment of humanity and certainly to the detriment of science. Now, this is further breaking news that supports this claim of bacteria coming in from distant parts of our galaxy. The Chinese space station has reported a few months ago that new bacteria unknown to them, unknown to biology, has been discovered on the outside of the Chinese space station. So this has been amply verified, I think, but it's been ignored because it is against the culture of our times. A vast amount of data from many different fields, I think, point decisively to life being a cosmic phenomenon. And, and this, of course, contradicts the reigning Darwinian, purely local Darwinian paradigm of Earth-centered life. So what we have is this thesis: life is a cosmic phenomenon, right? It's the idea of panspermia, Vedic and Exergus, all the ancient guys have been vindicated in this. I think European science has not been vindicated, unfortunately. This statement has been supported from astronomy, has been supported from geology, facts of geology, from DNA studies and from evolution studies, and from direct stratospheric measurements, the measurements that were first made in 2001 by the Indian Space Research Organization. In 2025, in the present year, there's scarcely any doubt that life is a cosmic phenomenon and that we on the Earth are a part of a tiny part of a cosmic chain of life that connects our tiny planet, our insignificant planet, to the remotest corners of the universe. Finally, I want to address this question. And again, it's a question that has been asked through ancient times, through Vedic times, through Hindu mythology, Indian mythology. Everywhere, ancient ideas have converged on this question: how did life begin in the universe? Not how did life start on the earth, but how did life begin in the universe? Cosmology and biology then come together in the beginning, or was there ever a beginning? Was there a beginning to everything, beginning of the universe? Standard theories of astronomy from the turn of the 20th century maintained that the universe started ex nihilo, from nothing, in a Big Bang, and it's called the Big Bang cosmology. And that has dominated Western thinking, dominated scientific thinking for over 100 years. Culturally accepted, this view has been culturally accepted, the Big Bang origin of the universe. And the Big Bang origin of the universe, you must remember, is just 13.8 billion years old ago, and that's about 3 times the age of the Earth. Can you imagine that? That's the whole universe is just 3 times the age of the Earth. That's what modern cosmological ideas, or currently culturally accepted cosmological ideas, have maintained. So there's a Big Bang and this whole fairy story, sorry to call it a fairy story, of processes that lead to modern galaxies, modern stars, happens in this very, very short span of time. Now that's in trouble. That theory and that story is in very serious trouble because of the new discoveries that have been made in the last months using the James Webb Space Telescope. This is a galaxy, a very, very distant galaxy, discovered from the James Webb Telescope at a distance of 16.7 redshift 60.7, implying that it's now at a distance of 35 billion light years if you accept that redshift of 60.7. So it's older than the age of the universe, according to, if you believe this calculation. So there are many, many contradictions that are really just around the corner. So the Eurocentric Big Bang theory, I think, is just virtually out of the window, almost out of the window. And the theories that survive are basically just 2 theories. One is the Hoyle-Burbidge-Narika oscillating universe theory, a steady-state theory, or quasi-steady-state theory. cyclic universe. Or Rosa Penrose, the Nobel laureate, and Turok had a very similar theory of the universe sort of bouncing along and having an infinite duration. So that I think those are the two models that would survive, and a creation destruction cycle of Vedic and Hindu cosmologies comes to mind. Day and night of Brahma being a single cycle, not 13.7 billion years, but 8.64 billion years according to this calculation. But that's all that's happening. And I think there's an alarming trend in the present year, into 2025, to ignore the entire body of evidence that supports panspermia, entire body of evidence that contradicts the, the Big Bang theory as well, and to ignore the idea, to regard the idea of microorganisms, viruses, life being eternal, arriving from space, as being unscientific. On the contrary, all of science that I've looked at over the past 30, 40, 50 years converges on this same single hypothesis of life being a cosmic phenomenon, and the universe now being of infinite age. This vast body of new data is disregarded as being controversial, culturally inadmissible, belonging to a non-standard, perhaps non-European knowledge tradition. And this attitude, of course, poses an imminent danger, not just for science, but for the well-being of all of us, for the whole of humanity. Perhaps the worst casualty of all is our self-image as the supreme life form in the cosmos, which will, of course, be shattered and require major efforts on the part of by psychologists, and would need psychological readjustment to have a panspermic view and a view of the universe as being an eternal universe. When this paradigm shift is fully considered, of course, it is likely that the entire structure of human society will undergo a transformation more profound than any that has happened for the last 300 years, perhaps any that has happened for the last few thousand years. In 2025, the Earth-centered spontaneous generation theory, along with the culturally accepted Big Bang bandwagon theory, is very close to falling off the cliff. And this is a saying of Mahatma Gandhi, which I would like to end with. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and eventually you win. And I think there's no question that in the fullness of time, the ideas that I've discussed today, rather briefly and perhaps imperfectly through difficult technological glitches, would be the right theory, would prevail. And always the right theory wins over the wrong theory. Thank you very much.